Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, fine. So let's start with GRC. So this would be an introductory and a demo session in which I'll be showing you what all the topics we're gonna cover under GRC. Okay. So first of all, GRC signifies over here is governance, risk, and compliance. So this is the name of the SAP product what we are going to pursue in this class. Okay, so versions. If I say versions, so it was initially started with 4.0. Okay, naming it as Versa tool. Okay, Versa tool. So now with evolution, in 2022, we have the latest version for SAP GRC, that is your 8100. What does that mean? The S4 system and your GRC system are in same box. So this is the latest one, the version 8100, but it was developed with version 4.0 Versa tool in year 1990, and this is the latest one with year 2022. And again we have one more version, that is your 1200, which is pretty much similar as of 8100, but here the GRC and the ECC, or what I say S4 or ECC, are in a same box, but here in 1200 these two are in different box. Okay, so this is GRC. So when we call a terminology GRC over here, what does come to your mind? I mean, what's the first thing you feel or you make an image of when you hear the word governance, risk, and compliance?
So it's when I hear of governance, risk, and compliance, for me, it's the companies be falling in place in terms of regulations that have been passed by whatever government of that country. And when it comes to the risk, are they operating their company in a way that it is, when they're using, for example, computers, they are not at a risk of being, for example, hacked? And compliance, are they compliant to laws and regulations?
Okay. Okay, that's a very generic thing, I'll say. We can sum up it in this way, like governance, risk, compliance, if it has multiple modules: access control, process control, risk management, nota fisca electronica, and your GTS, global trade service. Okay, so in this course is purely dedicated to access control. So whatever we are going to have in this session, that would be for AC version. Okay, that is your access control 12.0 or 8100. So our prime focus over this particular course would be access control. That's a component of GRC. So when I say that's a component of GRC, so there are other components which has different functionality, and SAP is packaging it as a product so that customer can have a leverage of it. Okay. So what does that mean by GRC access control, or only GRC terminology? So governance, risk, and compliance has been developed by SAP, which determines that at which point of time, what actions and what what monitors you want to implement on your particular system to enhance or to run the business smoothly. Okay, so that would be the definition of GRC. Again, moving on to GRC access control. So what does it mean? So the word itself, access control, signifies whatever the accesses we are representing to the to the users over the tool SAP. So that can be regularized. We can use this particular access control to regularize the access of the individuals from the SAP landscape. Okay, let me put it in like this way, that access control can be used for eliminating the risks, for using the critical access, for developing some kind of rule, and for enhancing the automation. The existing manual process can be automated with the help of your access control 12. Okay, so let me tell you the components what are associated with access control 12.0. Okay, so I'll say there are 4 components. Mainly, there are 4 components which are associated with access control 12.0 or 8100. So this would be the prime thing which will be there in the system for this particular access control. So let me draw it. You are able to see my screen, right?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. So let me draw the modules, whatever we will be covering in our sessions. What are the topics? Okay, so access control stands on 4 pillars. Okay, so what are these 4 pillars? The first one would be your ARA, that is your access risk analysis. Okay, the second one would be your EAM, that is your emergency access management. Okay, the third one would be your BRM, business role management. And the last one, the most important one, which you would be using for automation kind of activity, is your ARM, access request management. Okay, so these are the 4 components what are residing under GRC access control 12.0, and which we will be covering in our sessions. So if anyone asks you that what's the component of access control 12.0, so you can term it as ARA, the first one, EAM, the second one, BRM, the third one, and ARM, the fourth one. So being the 4 pillars under the access control, this components control the access part specifically in your S4 system or any other landscape what you have in our SAP landscape. Okay, so what all activities can we perform in each of them? Let's note it down. Okay, so what's the task of access risk analysis? Okay, so the word itself, access risk analysis, signifies that it has to do something with the risk. Okay, Siti, you can pause me and ask me for if you have any queries. You can stop me right away and you can have the query.
Okay, no, we're still fine for now.
Okay, yeah. So over here, what are the features of access risk analysis? So the word itself, access risk analysis, signifies that it has something to deal with the risk. Okay, So sub points for access risk analysis is, first of all, we will identify the risk. So the main task here would be to, before we do anything with the risk what we have in system, first of all, we have to identify the risk existing in the system. Second point, we have to remove the risk if at all there is a risk in the system. So being an GRC consultant, our first priority would be to remove the risk from the system. If at all there is a requirement, I mean, there is a situation in which we are unable to remove the risk because of certain business policies, that risk cannot be removed at that point of time in which we have identified that there is a risk in the system. At that point of time, what we will do, we will go for the mitigation of risk. So if I sum up, under ARA, these three are the prime tasks or prime functions that can be implemented over the SAP system. So we can identify the risk. Now, if I say risk, what do you mean by risk? Could you please define it? I mean, if we are considering it as a risk over here, so what kind of risk it would be? I mean, what do you feel the risk is in the system?
Something that can compromise the system.
Okay, something that can compromise the system or something that can affect the system in a larger way. Okay, so here the risk signifies the risk associated with your access. So it might be a little bit confusing that how can a risk be associated with the access. Let us say an example. If someone, we will take it in a business way. Do you have any idea on customer vendor or like purchase order?
No.
Okay, let me give another example. Someone has an capability of editing your bank account details. Okay, someone has a capability from the bank who can edit your bank account number in their database. Okay, and another person has a capability to approve that particular change in the system, the change that has been, the account number change that has been done on your account. Okay, these are two job functions. I mean, two different persons. The first one would have the capability to edit your bank details. The second one person would have the capability of approving the task, like whatever the change that has been made on the system. So he is the responsible person who will approve that particular change. Suppose for an instance, if these two jobs are with a same person, person X. So person X, what all job he has or what all function he has is, the first one is he can edit the payment. The second one is he can approve that change what has been made in the system. So first of all, let us consider that both the function are with people or a person X. So what can he do? He can change your bank account number with his bank account number and approve that particular line item or the request. So once that has been done, name would be yours, but the bank account number would be changed from your account number to that person's account number. So once you will receive any payment, so it will not come directly to your account number, but it will move to that person's account number because your account number has been changed by that person. So if there would be two persons who will have this particular job function, then this kind of fraud wouldn't be happen, because on approving itself, he will ask the reason of changing the account number. But if these two things are with a single person, then what will happen? He can commit a fraud by changing the account number and approving that particular account number change request within himself. So did you get the example?
Yes, I understood.
Yeah. So this is something a risk, which is a kind of access kind of risk. How is it an access kind of risk? Because he is having both the accesses, that is your editing the account number and approving the edit that has been done by on the account number. So if these two type of accesses are residing inside a particular system with a single person, then this should be termed as a risk. So in this case, we have example, we have identified the risk, whatever the risk we have in the system, we have identified it. The next step according to the, with the example would be remove the risk. So now we have identified that this person X has two type of access, and this combination of two access is a risk in our system. So how will we remove the risk? Either we will remove one job function from him, maybe editing the payment, or editing the account number, or maybe approving the edit that has been made. So if we remove one of the job function from him, so he will left with only one, which will not be a risk. So this combination of these two job functions is creating a risk in the system. So by removing one of the function from the user's access, we can remove the risk from the system. Now let's move to the third part, mitigation of risk. So suppose, let's say, business identifies that this person is working remotely from the on-site and we don't have any resource over there to split the job function. So we cannot afford to lose the authorization or the access from that user. The two accesses, that is your first one is your edit the account number. Second one is to approve on the edit that has been made on the account number field. So business says that we cannot afford to lose a person who is having these two accesses. So let the risk be in the system, you handle it. So in that case, if access is not being removed, then risk would be there in the system. How will we deal with it? So that's a concept known as mitigation. So mitigation controls are created in the system against the risk. So in order to minimize the risk, we position a person on the on the top of that risk who will monitor that risk by mitigating of the risk. So in our course, we will deeply see what all components we have under this mitigation of risk and how do we perform this activity. So this is for access risk analysis. We will be covering these three topics inside the access risk analysis. Let's move on to our next part, that is your EM, emergency access management. So what's the relevancy of emergency access management? First of all, inside a particular system, we have users, we have roles. Let me draw that as well. So SAP is a role-based authorization concept. So this is a user one. So he wants to perform some activity in the system. So until and unless he has some roles, he will not be able to perform the activity. So what roles are? Let me draw it diagrammatically. Suppose I say this user is having these two. Okay, let me draw one more. Role 1, role 2, and this one would go for your role 3. So to get an access in SAP, you have to have roles in your system. Okay, So compliance is maintained in such a way that we don't have the critical roles within ourselves in the system. So whatever we are executing in the system, whatever we want to execute in the system of SAP, suppose this user wants to execute something on SAP, so he has to execute it through a transaction code. Okay. So those transaction code are clubbed inside these roles so that we could have this access. So if I say inside this role, I have a transaction code. Let me frame it one more way. So inside this roles, we have something called as transaction code. Okay. T code. The basic terminology is your T code. So let me cite some example. It should be like SU01. These are the kind of T codes. Each T code has specific functionality. So you have to remember the T codes in order to use all the functionality you will be having in your module. Okay, SU53. So again, I'll say ST01 or maybe ST auth trace, or maybe I can say SM59. Again, let's say SM04. Okay, SPRO. So these are the type of transaction codes what we provide to the access to the users. So that's for first part. Second part, that is, these T codes cannot be accessed directly by a user. So these T codes cannot be accessed directly by a user, but rather than that, we put this T code inside a role, and this role is again assigned to the user. Then what happens? The user will be able to execute all these T codes in the system. Any questions until here?
So far, so good.
Okay, great. Now, moving on with emergency access management. What's the task of it? So now I have listed few transaction codes over here, SU01, SUIM, SU53, or these are. So there are certain transaction codes that cannot be provided to the user from the roles, directly from the roles. It's not like that it cannot be provided, but according to the compliance related issues, ideally it shouldn't be there with the user's access. But there is a requirement that user need to use this transaction code in order to perform their day-to-day activity job. Rather being a critical transaction code that cannot be assigned, but again there is a requirement for those transaction codes to be assigned. So there is a conflict. So SAP has come up with an idea that this critical transaction code, which cannot be provided through an access, normal access, can be provided through emergency access management. So the first thing what it does is access to critical transaction code or risky transaction code. So first thing what it does is it provides access to the critical transaction code or maybe your risky transaction code. The second point for which it is used is whatever the transaction code that has been used by the user that is completely logged into the system, user session is logged into sheets. So if a user is having, irrespective of being critical or non-critical transaction code, if a user is using EAM or FFID concept, firefighter ID concept inside EAM, so user session, that means during the session he logs in and logs out. The complete session would be logged as in what all activity he did during his tenure, that is captured in a sheet and will be reviewed by a person. So if we are getting worried about the critical transaction code what we have in the system, so that can be managed, and that particular transaction code, if we are using it under emergency access management, then after the user logs in and logs out, the session, what he have performed with his access is being logged and reviewed by a person. So the third point, mean the advantage what we have is review of your sheet generated in user session. Okay, so these are the prime functionality for emergency access management. So now I have shown you that user is assigned to a role, and this role are again assigned to few transaction code. Because of this only the user will able to access this transaction code. So under the third component, that is your business role management, what are the functionality of it? So the basic functionality of it is create the roles. So these roles, what you see here, whichever we are providing to user in order to have access to this transaction codes. So that creation of this role will handled by BRM. Okay, that's the first part. Proper documentation of role. So there are certain things that needs to be taken care inside the role, that the role should be risk free, that role should have an approver, and that role should have a proper naming convention. So that all the aspects can be taken care with business role management. Okay, and the last part, the most important part for this would be like to get the role be visible in access request form. So what's access request form? So in order to process with the automation in which the assignment of this role, I'll say, so I'll say the process in which this, now if we are assigning this role one to this user one manually, so we have something called as an automation in which this particular role will automatically assign to be this user. So in that part, this role should be visible in that automation form so that it can be selected under this user for requesting the access. So to have this role visible in that form, we have to use BRM in our landscape. Okay. Now, the last component of GRC access control, let's say the first one is your, just a second. Yeah, what is happening? Okay, no issues. It's visible. So, automation of each of the process. So this access request management will have the complete automation of the processes, starting from the user assignment of role, maybe this firefighter ID or this business role. Everything can be automated here in this access request management. So this is the most important thing what we have in our GRC system. So it has multiple workflows, and again it has multiple options or customizations that can be carried out so that it will be an enhanced GRC or governance risk and compliance landscape that can be established on top of a score or any other system. Not if I say like any other system, it should be SAP specific or it should be able to integrate with any of the SAP solutions. Okay. The first one is automation of each of the process. The second one is like proper enforce of what I say like rules that needs to be implemented on system. So these are the rules or I mean sub points what has been associated with this GRC access control 12.0 or 8100. So these four are the pillars of GRC access control environment: access risk analysis, emergency access management, business role management, access request management. So do you have any questions until here?
I do. I just wanted to ask you. So when we started, you said there is SAP security and then SAP GRC, and I said I'm a beginner. So far, I'm understanding what we're doing, but I just wanted to know that how are they related, SAP security and GRC? Is it that there is one that one needs to start with before they do the other, or you can choose whichever one you start with?
I mean, you mean these modules?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a, I mean, sequential thing. If we are unable to know what ARA is, then we will not able to understand this. And again, if these combination of these two are not done, then we will not do, I mean, we will not be able to understand this. So we will go in this, yeah.
Sorry, Akesh. I mean, SAP security and SAP GRC. Is it the same thing?
I'm not sure. I mean, this GRC is access control.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that, but I'm saying there is also SAP security, right?
Could you please type this word in your chat? I mean, I'm getting confused with this word.